Where did you meet Ford?
President Ford, I met President Ford. I was uh, I was with the Warren Commission. He was one of the people on the Warren Commission. And before that, I'd seen him up on the Hill sometime because, he'd been minority leader. But that's when I really got to know him when he was, and also because Rumsfeld was his chief of staff then. And I got to know Rumsfeld because Nixon had put me on first the Productivity Commission and then the Price Commission. And Rami was the chief guy in the White House who was dealing with those. So that's how I got to know Rumsfeld. And we were both in the cabinet together, I think, because he became Secretary of Defense. So that's how we.
Now, you had avoided, as you said, government work. You had turned down judgeships for years. What made you decide to accept the Department of Transportation, being Secretary of the Department of Transportation?
Well, I was up in Vermont. I got a telephone call to come down and see the President of the United States. I'm walking. It's President Ford, and Romney's in the room. He offered me two other jobs. One was a cabinet job, actually Secretary of HUD, and the other one was to be ambassador to the UN, to both of which I said no. He then said, what about the Department of Transportation? Could you be secretary? Well, I didn't realize or know they had a Department of Transportation. And a lawyer will never say, I don't know what you're talking about. So I said, well, let me think about that one. And I come home, and fortunately my daughter was home from Yale Law School that weekend, and she said, you ought to do it, because at that time, less than 200 Americans had been in the cabinet. It's something you should do. So I picked up the phone and called and said, if you still want me, you got the guy you want. So that's how I got the job.
But it meant that you had to resign from
Oh, yeah.
all of these
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
boards, and your partnership had to go on. I mean, it cost you a small fortune.
Well, it did cost, but my mother raised that question. She said, why would I give it up for $60,000? There wasn't pay that. But I did it, and I guess there had been a study. I know, who's the guy? Pete Peterson had been chairman of a committee, and his job was to raise the pay of top people in the government. And he made recommendations, and that's how you got the present system. Except, he said, with the cabinet officers, they shouldn't be raised, because when they leave office, they'll do so well that they'll make it up. So I used to always tell Pete, if I don't make it up, I'm going to sue you someday. Yeah. But no, so I really did. And I knew President Ford. And also, the country needed, I thought, new leadership. And people that had not been in politics, that had not, had something to do with the public but not in elective office, were needed. And I think if you look at it, that Ford did put together an awfully good cabinet. And of course, the great tragedy, he told me that if we'd won the election, I would have been the Attorney General, but we lost the election, so I went back to practice law.
Is that something that would have appealed to you?
Yes and no. It would have appealed to me because I think it's a great job, although I've always felt that when you take a top government job, you ought to do something that you never done before. I mean, Oxford has a great tradition at the Oxford High Table. Wherever you eat lunch there, you can never talk about your profession or what you do. You always have to talk about something else. And I've always felt that as a cabinet officer, if you could talk. Now, I'd done some training. I was on the Pan Am board, so I at least knew the airplanes flew. And I had done some transit work. But other than that, I had not. So it was a new experience, and it was quite an experience. Every railroad in the Northeast was bankrupt then, so I had to reorganize, get them out. Amtrak had to do that. The 80% of the highway system was done. The other 20% wasn't done, all because of environmental problems. And for example, I-66 that you come in on, that wasn't built. I had to do that. There was no Washington subway. I figured out with Wall of Washington how to, use highway money for transit money, even though the statute says you shouldn't, but we worked that out. And then we reorganized the Coast Guard and everything, and it was a great experience. I enjoyed it.
Would you do it again?
Oh, sure, yeah. Under the circumstances, I would, yeah, I would. Well, I'm too old now, but if I had been younger, sure.